Hello, my name is Alice. I have once again been gone for a little while, but I think that's just gonna be customary on my channel, I fear. I'm not exactly like a serious YouTuber that put all my time into this. So, I'm just gonna make videos when I feel like it, and yeah, right now I felt like it. That being said, the reason I've been gone for a little while is because there's been so much stuff happening in my life, it's insane. There's been so much to do lately. I've done an internship, which was really fun and really challenging and really scary, but most of all, really fucking busy. And on top of that, my cat has been ill, and sadly, recently we had to put her down. Now, this was very sad for me. I'm still very sad about it. It was only like a few days ago. She was my childhood cat, and I don't want to get too much into it because that's just not the point of this video, but yeah, that happened. And so much other stuff has been happening, and I'm just kind of all over the place. So, in the middle of this mess, I have been redesigning my OCs. Now, these OCs are from a book I have been writing. I started writing it in 2020 when I was 16 years old. Now, the book became way too long and way too convoluted, and eventually it just kind of lost its spark. And I think I was writing it up until like 2024, maybe even 2025. And obviously, the difference of being 16 and being like 20, 21 is quite huge. So my writing style changed, the story I wanted to tell changed, and it just became kind of a mess. So I just stopped writing the book, sadly. But I still love these OCs. So I decided to redesign them because I wanted to give them a fresh start. Now, I wanted to give them kind of a simpler design because I'm kind of planning on maybe making a comic out of the story instead, like just completely rewriting it, rewriting the characters slightly, simplifying their designs, and just going with it. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to pull through that. I'm hoping I will because I do love these OCs, but that's basically what this video is. It's the start of that process. I drew 2 pictures each of each character. These are the 5 main characters of the story. So I gave them a design of how they look at the beginning of the story and then at the end of the story. So yeah, in this video, we'll look at the redesigns, we'll go through the world building, the storyline of this story that I want to tell, and we'll go through the characters individually. Obviously, I'll give you a very boiled down version of everything because, well, it's a very long story. There's a lot of details because it's me writing it. And obviously, a lot of things might change, so I don't want to tell you too much in case it just changes later. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into the world building. So, the country that this story takes place in is called Aarhus, and that name is inspired by my hometown. Now, the nature and culture is inspired by Sweden, since I am Swedish, but it's a much rougher place in the story than Sweden is in real life. Basically, it's a monarchy and a dictatorship formed by hundreds of years of internal conflict and civil war. Now, the land is divided into 3 parts, 2 of them being ruled by 2 different royal families, and the third by some sort of dictatorship government thing. The country has recently united its kingdoms and stuff, so they all rule together without conflicts for the first time in a long time. All the laws are shaped in the crown's favor. There's no leading religion, so there's no prejudice based on gender, sexuality, and race based on religious beliefs. Women can be soldiers without a problem, no matter race. But homosexuality is still taboo since it doesn't produce children for the crown. And yes, this is relevant, I promise. So I'd say that Aarhus is a very diverse place in a way because you can basically be anyone, but at the same time, you're urged to be someone that is somehow beneficial to the crown. So your life is just kind of steered by that. So, homosexuality, although it is considered taboo because it doesn't contribute anything to the crown, it's not illegal because, them arresting people for being in same sex relationships would just take resources and money, and they don't want to waste money on that. They'd much rather put money to stop people who are trying to overthrow the crown and stuff like that. So, rundown, no racism, little to no sexism, but definitely some expectations on people and what roles they're expected to play in relation to society and the crown. That's that's my oppression rundown here. Now, because of all the civil wars and such, Aros is very underdeveloped as a country in comparison to the rest of the world. That is to say, the neighboring countries and most other countries in the world have technology reminiscent of the 1930s and 40s. Meanwhile, the people in Aros is living more like it's the mid 1800s. So, yeah, neighboring countries have cars and phones and stuff like that. Meanwhile, Aros have horses and swords and letters and almost more like medieval themes as well. Now, again, this is due to the civil wars ruining their process, as well as the crown shielding the country from the rest of the world and shutting everyone out. So the people within the country are mostly just not aware of how underdeveloped they are, and that everyone else is living another life around them, essentially. So yeah, it's basically like North Korea a little bit, if North Korea was very like living in the past, kind of, which I guess they are in a lot of ways, but like technology wise and stuff. Now, another thing that is important to mention when it comes to world building is that there are these creatures called trolls. Now, they are based on how trolls are in Swedish and Nordic folklore. I'll show a few pictures to kind of give you the vibe of what that is like. The trolls live in the mountains and the forest and along the coast. They have the same ancestors as humans, so monkeys, but have developed differently due to different lifestyles. They have tails and fangs and black eyes, green to grayish skin, and they're generally way taller than humans. Now, they were hunted by the crown because they possess healing powers and such, and were deemed too powerful because of it. Now, I'll get into this power more later. It's very much a thing that is kind of vague, and I might change it in the story later. But yeah, I'll get into it later as we discuss a character that is a troll. Anyway, a lot of them were murdered, and there aren't a lot of trolls left in Aros. Most people in the country barely even knows they exist and think they are only a myth to scare children. Now, sadly, there aren't really any trolls in other countries. They originate from Aros, so the few trolls that are left are the only ones in the world, essentially. And I mean, they've also been shielded along with the humans in the country, so they don't really know anything about the outside world either. Now, I have planned for there to be like an island or something not that far from the country where there are some trolls living freely that know more about the outside world, but this is a very like undeveloped idea and not something I've really established in the story, so I'm not going to talk about that because I don't know if that might change and stuff. So yeah. But yeah, that's some quick world building for you. Obviously it was kind of vague and not a lot, but that's just because I'm just getting started on refurbishing this whole story. So yeah, let's move on to the storyline. So basically, the storyline revolves around a princess and a prince. Now, the princess is from one of the kingdoms in the country, and the prince is from the other kingdom. They are both gay, and the prince is outed, and so the princess decides to marry him to save his image. So yes, lavender marriage. They then plan a revolution together to overthrow their parents and the monarchy in general because they don't like the way the country is run and they don't like the rules that their parents enforce, which obviously forces them to be someone they're not. They team up with two castle guards, one of which is the prince's toxic ex and the one of which is his current partner from a neighboring country. So that's kind of awkward. Obviously, we'll get back to these characters later. Eventually, they also team up with the trolls because they also want to overthrow the crown, who has been suppressing them and killing them for ages. And together they all form this revolution where they're basically trying to turn all of the citizens of Autos against the crown and trying to gather an army in order to fight them and overthrow the government. This then leads to a war, which the rebels end up winning. And that's basically the story. Obviously, there's a lot that happens, but that is a very basic rundown of the story. I'll get into it a little more as I talk about the characters as well, but yeah, that's a very basic rundown. So yeah, let's get into the characters and the character designs. So first of all, we have Maria. Now she hasn't changed that much since the first time I drew her. I think mainly her facial features have changed, maybe, because I've gotten a bit better, I like to think at least, at drawing POC features. Maria is black, so a few years ago, I made some efforts to kind of change her face a little bit because, I don't know, I think in the first pictures I drew of her, she looked a bit white, like she had more white, Eurocentric kind of features, and I wanted to strive away from that a little bit. Anyway, Maria is strong-minded and determined. She has a very strong moral compass and is a very independent person once given the chance. Although she has been coddled her entire life, which just kind of naturally comes with being a princess, and so her independence hasn't really been explored in the beginning of the story. Now, due to her being coddled and kind of shielded for her entire life, she is a bit naive, and this naivety makes her seem insensitive or too direct sometimes. Her moral compass can also make her seem very stubborn at times, for better or for worse, depending on the situation. She is essentially the leader of the rebellion. She starts it, and then when things get rough, she's the one who keeps pushing, which motivates others. This can sometimes lead to her being unrealistic or naive due to her background, and thus lead her into more trouble than necessary. So, for example, some characters can sometimes warn her, like, oh, don't do this, and she'll almost take it as a challenge and do it anyway, because that's kind of what she had to do towards her parents when she was smaller, because, you know, she was very restricted and coddled and stuff like that. Now, at the beginning of the story, she is still a princess. Princess of Bergadal, to be exact. Bergadal is the kingdom Maria's family rules over, and it essentially means mountain valley in Swedish. Lots of names and things are in Swedish because the world is built with Nordic culture as inspiration, as mentioned. And also the book, when I was still writing it as a book, was in Swedish, so yeah. Anyway, Maria grew up hating her role as a princess. She was very stubborn and an adventurous child, which put her very much in opposition to what was expected of her. Her parents really tried hard to whip her into shape, but it really didn't work. She has a very strong personality that really just shone through, no matter how much they tried. She was always uncomfortable with the way people seemed afraid of her family and how they were expected to bow and stuff when they appeared. And as a teen, she also discovered that she was a lesbian. She started dating her maid, or her chambermaid. They had a very on and off relationship until their 20s. Basically doomed Yuri, you guys. And in her 20s, her parents also started pressuring her into marriage with a neighboring prince, which is also her childhood friend. His name is Philip. She always refused to marry him because she knew that she was a lesbian. She didn't want to put him through that. She didn't want to put herself through that. And she has never wanted children or to be tied down by a family in that way. but her parents put a lot of pressure on her to get married, seeing as she is an only child and conditions needed to become more stable within the country after 100 years of civil war, and so a union with a prince from the neighboring kingdom would be great for that. Now, when she finds out through gossip that the prince, Philip, is also gay, he has been caught in bed with a guard, she decides to marry him. Seeing her opportunity to save her friend and not have to conform entirely. She basically figured that, hey, I can save some of his grace. I don't need to do anything with him because he won't want to do anything with me, and we don't have to have children, you know? And that's basically how the story starts. She is unhappy, but finds a way out of her parents' castle and her way to a little bit more independence. Now, the end of the story isn't written yet, except for in short form. My plan is that she'll have to lead the revolution all the way to and then through the war. She was, as previously mentioned, one of the bigger figureheads within the war. She isn't a princess anymore, of course, and she has adapted to troll culture as she has many troll friends and is also dating a troll, Svea specifically, which we'll be looking at last in the lineup. She is much happier with her life post-war as she can be authentically herself and can start driving democracy, which is something she's always wanted. She likes lifting people's spirits and being part of change, but she isn't actually particularly drawn to being a leader since she got way too much of it as a child and young adult. So she'd much rather stand to the side and support as a pillar and focus more on her life instead of focusing on being perfect and an icon and stuff like that. But I do definitely think if she hadn't been born a princess, she could have definitely been like a politician or something. Basically, she ends up married to the troll, Svea, and being a leading figure in rebuilding the country and rewriting the laws and stuff after the war. Anyway, I love her designs and how she came out. Her design from the beginning of the story didn't change too much. The change instead lies in her second design for the end of the story, where her hair has been changed. She is skinnier since she didn't get much food during the revolution and the war, and she has some details from troll culture, which she has embraced with open arms. I'm thinking that her and Svea are really like progressive like that. They just embrace each other's cultures and stuff like that, and are welcomed into each other's families and everything, so it's really cute. And she's my girl and I love her. But yeah, let's move on. So the next character we're going to be looking at is the prince, Philip. Now, he hasn't developed that much, if I'm gonna be honest, since I first designed him. His face has changed a little bit, I think, but he looks mostly the same. Philip is, as a person, thoughtful and calm. He, like Maria, has a strong moral compass, but doesn't always act according to it. He doesn't necessarily, like, enforce anything. He needs someone to guide him when in need, which is a result of not having a support system as a child. Like Maria, he has been coddled and cooped up growing up, which makes him a tad naive in the beginning of the story. However, his parents have been way rougher with him and his brother than Maria's parents have been with her. Now, he is also one of the leading figures in the revolution, but he is much more low-key than Maria. He's good with words, so he manages most written communication and promotion during the revolution, inspiring and convincing people with his words. In the beginning, he is the crown prince of Skogamark, another kingdom in the country of Aros, where the story takes place. Skogamark translates to forest grounds. Philip is the firstborn child of 2 sons, and so he is, as previously mentioned, the crown prince, the one who will inherit the crown. He is 20 at the start of the story, I think, and yet his younger brother Carl, who is 18, is already married with a child on the way. Meanwhile, Philip remains unmarried. He has the same pressure on him as Maria, and his parents aren't as forgiving as previously mentioned. They have a clear preference for his brother. He has had a relationship with a guard named Björn that ended poorly and is dating another guard by the name of Ingvald at the start of the book. Both of these men get roped into the revolution in different ways, but we'll get back to that. Philip isn't as passionately displeased with his life as a prince as Maria. He doesn't like the way the servants are treated, but is comfortable and likes the stillness. He doesn't like living with his parents, however, and how they watch over him. As the story starts, he is caught in bed with his current partner Ingevald by a servant. Homosexuality is taboo since it doesn't produce children for the crown and country, but isn't illegal. His family instead throws Ingevald in prison for, quote, compromising or prohibiting the production of an heir, end quote, which is a law punishable by death in the country. After this, Philip is promptly locked in his room until Maria arrives and informs him that she wants to marry him. From there on out, they get married and come up with a plan together to save Ingevald from prison. That is the start of the revolution and acts of defiance between them. Now, during the revolution and everything it entails, Maria thrives, as previously mentioned, and becomes heavily involved with the trolls. Philip isn't thriving as well. He isn't the type to fight, to shuffle around the forest, or to put his life at risk. The harsh, high-risk life really takes a toll, which takes us to the second design. So, in the second design, Philip has changed. Ragged, stubbled, torn clothes, dead eyes. The revolution and war has taken its toll on him, and in the end, he comes out more broken than he entered. The world around them may be better, and it makes him happy to see, but he'll never be the same again. He has lost his cheer and pep. Also, his arm. The loss of his arm happens before the war. I won't get into details because, spoilers, and also, it could always change as I rewrite the story, but, losing his arm really hits him hard. It was difficult to lose a physical part of himself while he felt like he was also losing who he is as a person. He's so used to being Prince Philip with his title and his burden of inheriting the crown and having all these pressures on him that he doesn't really know how to be anything else or how to be himself. He was, of course, not happy in his role as prince either because he couldn't live as he wanted to, but it was something familiar to him that he grew up with, that he knew how to do, even though he wasn't very good at it. So, yeah, although the revolution and war was successful in enforcing its cause and bettering the country, it comes with a lot of cons too. And I wanted to use Philip to kind of show the various effects of revolution and war and that it does a lot of damage. It isn't all sunshine and rainbows and everything is fine, like Maria seems to think. A lot of the country is ruined. There's a lot of loss, and most people who fought are traumatized. And one of those people are Philip, so although he lives in a better world and he is free to be himself, he doesn't know how to. He has lost himself in this war. He never really had a chance to build himself up before everything just exploded. So now he's just lost, he doesn't know who he is, and he has to deal with all this trauma. And it got kind of dark there, but I feel it is necessary. I want to kind of use Philip's arc to challenge the notion often present in fantasy, where everything is just solved when wars are won and over. I feel like a lot of the time in fiction it's just like, oh yes, we have this thing we want to fight for, let's have a revolution, and then there's a war, and when the war's over, everyone's just like, yay! And it's like, yes, of course, you succeeded, and that's great. A change definitely needed to be made, but at the same time, war is never a positive thing in my book. It's going to ruin a lot of things, and again, I wanted to explore that in Philip. But yeah, anyway, concerning the design, I'm feeling kinda so-so. I feel like I've drawn him better before, so I might go back and redo it at some point, but I don't know. I struggled with him looking like a child. Because he is small, and I want his youth to show as he is scared and unsafe through a lot of it, and these characters are very young. They're my age. They're like 20, 21. Way too young to go through all of this in reality. And so I wanted to reflect that in his design, that he is very young and that the loss of identity and the trauma and everything makes him feel like a helpless child. But I struggled with the balance of not making him look like an actual child, Like, I want him to look like a man that has been reduced to feeling like a helpless child, but I feel like he low-key looks like a 12-year-old with a beard. So, I don't know. I might redo it, but, we'll see. Anyway, moving on. The next character is Björn. Now I know I've said this on the previous two designs too, but he has not changed, I would say, at all through the design process. Like the first time I drew him, he pretty much looks the same still. In my opinion, he is ugly. But to each their own. Beauty is very subjective. In my book, I think he's kind of an ugly man. Kind of irrelevant, but anyway. Björn is a very stubborn person like Maria, but is a lot ruder and less tactful. He's selfish and a coward, and yes, I'm basically just sitting here insulting him, but he is very disloyal in the way that he does what benefits him rather than what might be morally right. He is, overall, morally a bad person. Björn is a very good fighter though, and is good at giving orders and adds a lot of presence to the revolution since he is quite big and scary looking. He has a very dark background, which is obviously the base of his personality. It doesn't excuse anything he does though. Basically, at the beginning of the story, he works as a high-ranking guard at Skogamark's castle, so Philip's family's castle. He has a wife and two daughters in a semi-nearby village, but seldom visits them. Instead, he spends all his time at work. He is gay and cheats on his wife regularly. She knows this, which is part of why he seldom returns home, because he's ashamed. Now, this is why he and Philip broke up, since Philip realized he had a wife and kids and he was not messing with that. Also, the age gap was questionable. Philip was like 19 and something, and Björn was like 25-ish. So, yeah, Björn is a bad person, and I purposefully wrote him that way. I'm not trying to excuse his behavior here at all. But anyway, let's quickly recap his backstory. He grew up in the mountains with his father, who was a bit too old and worn to properly take care of him, so he had to kind of feed and fend for himself a lot. His mother died in childbirth with him, and so his father has always viewed it as his fault that she died. He hates his son and mainly uses him as a farmhand on their small sheep farm. When he finds out Björn is gay when Björn is a teen, he gets kicked out. Björn has nowhere to turn and camps in the mountains while hiking the road, hoping to find shelter, work, and food in Bergadal, which is the same kingdom where Maria is a princess. However, unfortunately, he is SA'd on the road by a gang of men, which obviously traumatizes him. He can't stand being in Bergadal anymore, and so takes the next boat over to a small fishing island outside the coast. There he works as a part-time fisherman and fish cleaner and gutter, and lives in a fishing shed by himself. This is the life he puts up with for years until he finally decides to go to a village in Skogamark where he becomes the apprentice of a blacksmith. At this point, he is about 17, 18. In the village, he meets his future wife, and although he knows he's gay, he sees the potential of a normal life with her, so he marries her and gets a job as a guard at the castle since it pays well. However, as we know, he starts cheating on her, so yeah. He has a dark past, obviously, but again, it does not excuse his actions whatsoever. He's still very selfish, and he could still work to better himself. Basically, as the story starts, he gets picked up by Maria and Philip to try and rescue Ingevald, and later he joins the revolution. It's mostly because he still has a bit of a thing for Philip and feels guilt and loyalty to him. He also learns to like Maria platonically, obviously, because their personalities kind of match. So yeah, he joins the revolution not really to better the country like everyone else, but rather to selfishly settle his own guilt a little. By the end of the story, I fear he's not much of a better person. He does manage to open up to the others about his past and stuff like that before the war, and he does make some friendship bonds with them despite everything. He also reconciles a bit with his wife and daughters and accepts the fact that she is living with another man that actually loves her, which really hits him hard, I gotta tell you, because he could never love her like that, and that also haunts him. Because his wife, I'm telling you, she's a really nice person, and she deserves way better than him. However, despite this slight character development, after participating in the war and doing his part, he basically decides to leave everything and everyone behind to go out to sea, since he's always been drawn to that life. It is a journey that will no doubt be good for him as a person and will develop him to be better, but it is also selfishly casting his friends and family, especially his daughters, who are still very young at this point and barely know him, away from his life. So yeah, Björn is morally a very bad person. But I also love him for that. He's a really interesting character to develop and portray, although obviously I don't have sympathy for a lot of the things he does, and obviously I do very much recognize that a lot of his actions are very problematic. But I really want to play with that. I feel like a lot of the time when there's a character who's kind of morally gray or morally bad, and their actions are based on their trauma and the way they were raised, people tend to just kind of excuse their actions, and I don't stand for that. Just because you have trauma and a background to consider when thinking about your actions, that doesn't mean that you don't have a responsibility to improve and not take that trauma out on other people around you. It's, if you have trauma, if you know that you have bad behavior caused by that trauma, it's your responsibility to end the cycle of abuse. And of course, that can be a very hard thing, but at the end of the day, the responsibility is yours. And I feel like I rarely see that explored in characters. I feel like a lot of the time when characters act badly and they have a dark past, people always just go, "Oh, but it's not their fault." And it's like, it is their fault though. They could try to get help and get better. Yeah, of course we should have sympathy for their struggles and what they've gone through. And of course we should recognize that you shouldn't have had to go through that. But at the same time, a person has to be held accountable for their actions. But anyway, I went on a little off the tangent there. In the future, in this future project I might make with these OCs, I am planning for Björn to kind of get maybe like a pirate boyfriend that can kind of whip him into shape a little bit when he goes to sea, in an eventual epilogue or something. But that's kind of getting ahead of myself. Again, he hasn't changed much with this new design. I do like how he turned out, but he looks much the same. As I've said, I think he's ugly, but some people are, and that's okay. Anyway, let's move on. The next character is Ingevald, aka the guard that Philip is currently having a relationship with. I would definitely say this is the character out of all of these characters that have gone through the biggest changes. And that is because he has been the character out of these 5 characters that I care the least about. He was, in all honesty, only written to be Philip's love interest, and it really shows. That's not something you can just build a character on. So I've added some changes to him to make him more interesting and make him feel more like an individual rather than just an extension of Philip's relationship. I felt I didn't have enough fat and chubby characters, so I changed that about his design. I also changed his personality slightly. He was always a cheery guy, but I upped it a little. Now, Ingevald, whose nickname is Valle, is a happy, positive person. Sometimes he can be a little too optimistic, and sometimes if his mood ever crashes, it crashes hard. He is just a very emotional person. He cares a lot about his small family that consists of his mother and sister, and he has a hard time seeing them so sparingly as he works at the castle. He met Philip on the castle grounds, as he is also a guard there. He is lower ranking than Björn. Philip took a liking to him, and after talking, flirting, and kissing a little and stuff, he made Valle his personal assistant so that they could see each other more often inside the castle. He's young, like 19 something. For reference, I think Philip is about 20 or 21, so there's only like a year and a half between them or something. He moved to Autos, the country they're in, due to his father dying. Him, his mother, and his little sister used to live in the neighboring country, which is much more developed and friendly than Autos, but it had a lack of job opportunities for a poor family like theirs. So they moved to Autos since it's trying to lure in more subjects from abroad, kind of like North Korea again. And they were basically told that there'd be work opportunities, which they badly needed for their economy. Of course, when they got there, they found that the government was very corrupt and it was very much ruled with an iron fist by the crowns of the country. But at that point, they couldn't really afford to move away again, so they just kind of settled in the situation. This results in Ingevald not being amazing at the language and also having a bit of an accent, which I find really cute. Anyway, Ingevald gets a job as a guard and his mother and sister begin farming vegetables. And this is something that wasn't previously part of his character, so it's still under development. But anyway, at the beginning of the story, he is imprisoned since his relationship with Philip has been discovered. He is starved and tortured and gets sick quickly as he is basically kept in a wet, cold prison cell underground. Now, his very existence is a huge deal of shame for the Skogamark royal family since he is both a man, lowly, and an immigrant, and the scandal of his affair with the prince has leaked out to the public. Philip and Maria successfully frees him, though, and he joins the revolution. During the revolution, he becomes good friends with Maria and Svea, the troll. Him and Svea have their optimism in common. He's a pillar for Philip, who is having a really hard time, and is the first person he opens up to about it. They really do love each other deeply, and it's really cute. Anyway, at the end of the story, he's still the same positive person, but a little more tired and torn. Philip's fragile mental state is also taking a toll on him, and it's hard for him to have to cheer everyone else up all the time and not having anyone to lean on himself. However, he's doing his best, and he's definitely not doing the worst out of the characters. My plan for him is that he becomes a teacher eventually when the country has recovered, but I don't know, this might change. I'm happy with his new design. I think he's super cute, and I love him with his grown out hair. I like him way better now than I did before, so I think that is a really good sign. He was originally written just to be a love interest for Philip, and I feel like I've successfully morphed him into something more. Obviously, these are just concept and just the beginning of redeveloping him as a character, but I feel like him having more of a backstory, more individuality and everything, really does a lot for their relationship too. It just makes it more interesting with the cultural differences. Maybe like Ingevald could come with stories from the outer world that Philip has never heard before. They could contribute so much more knowledge to each other and stuff like that. I feel like before, Ingevald was just supposed to be another citizen living in their country. He basically had the same kind of backdrop as Björn, coming from a village, having a family, living at the castle, and then being worried for his family during the war. And I felt like overall him and Björn just felt like the good and evil versions of each other, and I didn't like it. So, I'm satisfied that he feels like he's turned more into his own character a little bit. But anyway, let's move on to the last and my absolute favorite character, Svea. Now, Svea is a troll about the same age as the human characters. She is big, like most other trolls, and is a very bright, positive, and calm person. She really just radiates calm and kindness and is so very trusting and nice. This can sometimes lead to her taking risks that seem a bit risky, which makes the other trolls a bit annoyed with her at times. Now, trolls naturally don't trust humans considering their history of murdering and villainizing them, so a lot of trolls take a good long while to join the revolution and trust our human protagonists. Svea is a lot more open-minded and sees the potential for change, however, so she is the first troll to join the revolution. Now, during the development of the story, we get to see a lot of varying opinions on humans and the history and everything from different trolls, as some completely refuse to join the revolution. Svea ends up getting romantically involved with Maria as well, which is obviously very taboo both for humans and for trolls. There's even some troll friends of Svea's that completely reject her and end their friendships with her because of it. Which, that perspective is also important and understandable because essentially this is Svea bonding with not only someone who is the same species as the people actively colonizing and killing them, but also a literal family member of the very people who ordered this whole thing to happen. As you can imagine, Maria's parents and Philip's parents are both heavily involved with the killing and assassination and eradication of trolls. So again, this relationship is very taboo, and it is honestly understandable that some trolls turn against Svea and the revolution overall, because why would they trust these humans, you know? That's something I also have fun with playing with in this story, that a colonized and hunted group of people have a hard time trusting the people who are, well, colonizing and hunting them, obviously. However, Svea and Maria form a strong bond together, which actually helps open more trolls and humans' eyes to the revolution and how trolls and humans can work together to reform the country to a place where everyone can live. This is largely done by realizing that the real enemy of both trolls and humans are the crown, since, I mean, most citizens of the country don't even know that trolls exist. Now, as previously mentioned, the trolls have powers that make them very powerful. Essentially, they can connect to nature through these things called stenrösen, aka piles of stone. These stone piles are actual historical ancient monuments from the Viking ages here in Sweden. They were usually built to mark graves and county lines and such. In my story, these stone piles were raised by trolls to commemorate the dead and mark places for rituals. Essentially, some of the stones have runes carved onto them, which connects them to all living things in nature through an ancient language. This ancient language used to be known to humans as well, but as technology, culture, and war erupted, humans have lost touch with this part of their culture, so only the trolls know how to activate the stones in the stone pile and access its powers. This might sound random or whatever, but this is the system I have built, so I might rethink it in the future and make it more like, I don't know, logical, but I really do like the detail of the stone piles being involved, so I'll definitely keep that. Anyway, this is getting long-winded. Basically, the powers the trolls receive from the stones after performing rituals is the power to feel and be connected to every living thing in a nearby vicinity and seeing its aura. This allows them to detect danger from a distance and helps them hide. If someone is injured or dying, a ritual can also be performed to heal them. You cannot resuscitate the dead, though. And healing rituals takes a lot of energy for everyone involved, so they're only performed when absolutely necessary. Okay, moving back to Svea after all of that. Svea hasn't changed that much from how she originally looked. The biggest difference is her hair, which is now braided differently. She had dreads earlier, but I decided against it since she doesn't have the hair type for that hairstyle and also isn't black. She isn't white or anything either, considering she's a troll and her features are definitely POC coded, but it feels wrong to put dreads on a non-black character, so I changed her braids to be more Nordic inspired. And no, this is not a fucking reference to that TikTok drama where Americans called dreads and black hairstyles Nordic hairstyles to rage bait people or whatever. That was really bad, dude. That sucked. Way to try and erase two cultures through internet drama. Like, what the fuck? Anyway, this is not a reference to that at all. Anyway, the trolls originally didn't have black eyes and tails either, but it is something I have decided to add. Their eyes are inspired by chimpanzees, whose scleras are brown and black looking, because I wanted to kind of put a connection to this. Both humans and trolls come from monkeys, basically, and that trolls kept some physical features, and that humans kept some, you know? But anyway, I really like how it turned out. Now, at the end of the story, Svea is really happy along with Maria, and they get married. She becomes a blacksmith and continues the fight for troll rights alongside her wife. She has the potential to become a real leader, especially considering the fact that she doesn't really want to be one, which is, as they say, one of the greater qualities to look for in a leader. Now, before the war, she is elected head of the troll group by the troll elders, so she's basically forced into the leader role anyway, which, although she doesn't like having too much power, she really is the perfect leader, so... And Maria is the perfect right-hand woman for her as well, I think. So, yeah, the lesbians actually get a good ending. Feels good inside for me, to be honest, because it's not a common occurrence, I fear. Sorry to the doomed Yuri lovers out there. Though, as I said earlier, Maria and her ex-lover, her chambermaid, kind of have a doomed Yuri thing going on before Svea. And the chambermaid actually dies during the war, so there's some angst, in connection to that, so... Anyway, I love how Svea turned out. I think she's really hot. I'm not gonna lie. I obsessed over her during high school so hard. I literally made several projects in art class surrounding her, so yeah, she's my fave from this set of OCs. But yeah, anyway, that was all the characters, so let's get into what's next for this story. So, as previously mentioned, my plan is to turn this into a comic. It's a very slow process, which I'm not planning on starting fully yet. However, I'm just begun slightly redesigning these characters, and that is definitely a small starting point. If it ever comes together, I might post it on Webtoon, but that's really far off, so I cannot promise anything, and I know also Webtoon doesn't have the greatest reputation, but it is an effective way to share a comic online, so I don't know. I'll be considering different options and weighing them carefully if I ever manage to finish any sort of comic. So yeah, I can't promise anything, but I really hope something comes out of this because I really love these OCs and it'd be so boring to just not do anything with them. This video was really fun to make because I don't often redesign characters. My OCs tend to kind of stay the same as the first time I draw them. But I had so much fun drawing these, and they really needed a little fresher look and a simpler look if they're ever going to become a part of any sort of comic. I love these characters with all my heart, and I really hope that shows. All my high school friends had to suffer through hearing about them constantly, so now you do too. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Good luck to you and have a great life.